Have you ever imagined what would happen if a millionaire met his pregnant ex-wife while celebrating his own wedding to another woman? This is exactly the heart-stopping event that unfolds in our story, setting off a chain of surprises, heartfelt encounters, and unexpected truths. As our characters battle betrayal, shattered dreams, and second chances, you'll be drawn into their emotional journey, eager to see how they cope with the unimaginable. We promise there's more to this tale than meets the eye. Secret letters, dramatic revelations, and a precious life on the line. Stay with us to find out the final destiny of each character. If you enjoy powerful storytelling and love seeing how true resilience shines in the face of heartbreak, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more captivating stories and discussions. Marcus Bennett stood in the grand ballroom of the Rosemore Hotel, surrounded by the glitter of crystal chandeliers and the hum of polite conversations. Tonight was supposed to mark the start of his perfect new life, a lavish reception celebrating his marriage to Ivy Hahn, a woman of undeniable charm and impressive business acumen. The walls gleamed with ornate gold trim, and freshly cut roses filled the air with a heady, sweet fragrance. Guests mingled in designer gowns and tailored suits, sipping top-shelf champagne, while a live quartet played a gentle waltz in the corner. By all accounts, Marcus had every reason to feel triumphant. He was now heralded as a self-made millionaire with a thriving tech company, MB Innovations, and his personal life was supposedly blossoming alongside his professional success. Yet, as he looked around, a hollow sensation crept up on him, defying the celebratory mood he had spent so much time orchestrating. He excused himself from a cluster of colleagues praising his latest deal, blaming a slight headache. As he drifted toward the quieter side of the room, he caught a glimpse of a waitress balancing a tray of empty glasses near the exit. Initially, her presence seemed no different from that of the other staff members. She wore the same crisp black uniform and moved with discreet efficiency. But something about her profile triggered a flicker of recognition inside him. The tilt of her chin, the delicate line of her jaw, even the way she stood with a quiet poise. It all felt hauntingly familiar. Taking a few tentative steps closer, he felt the soft music and the clink of champagne flutes recede into a dull buzz in his ears. Under the warm glow of a wall sconce, he could finally see her face. Time seemed to slow as shock and disbelief surged through his chest. It was Sophia Morales, his ex-wife, the woman he had divorced 6 months prior in a storm of resentment and wounded pride. But that was not the only thing sending his heart into freefall. Sophia was clearly pregnant. Her belly, rounded in the later stages of pregnancy, was unmistakable beneath the slightly loose uniform. A whirlwind of questions bombarded Marcus. Why was she working as a waitress here, of all places, on this particular night? Why had she never told him she was expecting? And if the child was his, how could she keep this a secret? Memories of their past life flooded his mind, late nights strategizing for MB Innovations when it was just a fledgling startup, the jokes they shared to soften financial worries, and the promises they made to always stand by each other's side. Now, those promises felt like a distant dream, replaced by the stark reality of a reception designed to celebrate a new marriage while the ghost of his old life stood before him, visibly carrying his child. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he watched Sophia collect more empty glasses from a nearby table, carefully balancing them on her tray with the kind of grace he remembered from their earliest days together. He thought back to when they first met in college, two ambitious dreamers taking extra shifts to pay for textbooks and dorm fees. They bonded over late-night coffee runs and parted ways in the early hours of the morning, yet always found time to encourage each other's ambitions. Sophia used to laugh until she snorted, unafraid to look silly in his presence. He recalled how she had once run across campus in the pouring rain just to hand him a flash drive with a critical presentation for his pitch competition. Their eventual marriage was a natural progression of a love story that had seemed destined for greatness. She was there when MB Innovations existed only as a notion in his mind, cheering on every fledgling idea he scribbled in worn notebooks. Sophia worked grueling hours, waiting tables and tutoring underclassmen, using every paycheck to help sustain them, while Marcus chased down elusive investors and refined his prototypes. Their bond had been built on shared sacrifice, mutual admiration, and the unwavering belief that if they persevered, they would rise together. As he advanced toward her, his new wife, Ivy Han, stepped momentarily into his path. Dressed in an elegant ivory gown that hugged her figure, Ivy exuded the poised sophistication of someone who lived in the world of polished events and lofty corporate deals. Her eyes flickered with curiosity when she noticed him staring past her. Marcus mumbled something about needing a moment alone, sidestepping her polite inquiries. He felt a pang of guilt. He should be at her side, entertaining their guests. But he could scarcely think about Ivy while Sophia stood just a few yards away, carrying his past and possibly his future. A swirl of memories clashed with an onslaught of immediate concerns. 6 months ago, he and Sophia had parted in bitterness, both convinced the other had become unrecognizable. Had he really changed that much? Had his hunger for success clouded every promise he'd ever made to her? And what about the baby? Was it truly his? Did she hide the pregnancy to keep him from stepping back into her life? Or had she given up believing he could care about anything other than MB innovations? His mind reeled with a cocktail of guilt, shock, and undeniable curiosity. The million-dollar reception, the opulent decor, the media coverage that lauded his new marriage, none of it mattered at that moment. In the hush that settled between the swells of music, he knew he had no choice. He had to confront Sophia, to look her in the eye and ask the question that, had seized his heart the moment he saw her belly. Was he the father of her unborn child? Summoning courage he hadn't realized he lacked, Marcus cut through the crowd. Friends and business associates tried to catch his attention, but their congratulations and handshakes felt like noise in the background of a more pressing crisis. As he wove around clinking champagne flutes and flickering candles, he saw Sophia duck her head, as if sensing someone was closing in on her. Still, she continued her task, placing dirty dinner onto her tray with meticulous care. When he finally reached her, the hum of the reception seemed to fade. "Sophia," he managed, voice barely above a whisper. She froze for a split second, then slowly turned around. Marcus noticed the strain in her eyes, the dark circles that suggested sleepless nights, and the way her hand trembled ever so slightly as she held onto the tray. This was the woman who once greeted him at the door of their cramped apartment with joyous hugs whenever he came home from a stressful meeting. Now her expression was guarded, her posture tight. "Marcus," she said quietly, her tone as neutral as she could make it. There was no hug, no tearful reunion, just a wary acknowledgement. He lowered his gaze toward her swollen abdomen. Before he could stop himself, the words tumbled out. Is it?" He couldn't finish the question, but the look in his eyes made his meaning plain. Sophia inhaled sharply, eyes flickering with a mixture of anger, sadness, and something else he couldn't decipher. She nodded once, so slight he almost missed it. The confirmation sent a jolt through his entire body. Suddenly, the meticulously planned wedding reception he'd invested in, the flower arrangements, the string quartet, the public vow to a new partner, felt like an elaborate farce. "I didn't know," he murmured, desperation evident. "You never told me." Part of him wanted to accuse her, to demand to know why she had kept this secret. Another part felt shame recalling how dismissive he'd been in their final arguments and how completely he had turned away once the divorce was set in motion. Could he blame her for not wanting to fight for his attention when he had been so determined to push her aside? Sophia's voice remained steady, though her eyes welled with unshed tears. "Because you never gave me a chance," she said simply. "You were already gone. You had Ivy, you had your new life." The tray wobbled in her grip, and Marcus instinctively reached out to steady it. For a brief instant, their hands touched, and a painful rush of memories returned, years of building dreams together. Then she pulled away, turning her back to him. "I have to work," she said softly, her tone signaling the conversation was over. Marcus watched, rooted to the spot, as she walked off into the sea of well-dressed guests, leaving him with more questions than answers. Sophia retreated to the kitchen corridor, hoping the clatter of pots and pans would drown out the pounding of her heart. She set the tray down on a stainless steel counter, struggling to catch her breath. She had anticipated seeing Marcus here, of course. She knew this was his wedding reception. That knowledge alone had made her hesitant to accept the catering agency's shift. But she needed the money. And ironically, it was one of the higher-paying gigs available this weekend. Still, nothing could have prepared her for the reality of facing him again, especially under these circumstances. She rested a hand on her belly, feeling the faint flutter of movement within. There were moments in the past months when she imagined telling him about the baby. Each time, a knot of anger and heartbreak kept her from reaching out. After all, he had signed the divorce papers so willingly, as though discarding the years they'd shared was just another item on his to-do list. The memory of that night, when she'd finally walked out on him, clung to her like a persistent shadow. It had been their 6th wedding anniversary. She had prepared a romantic dinner, wearing his favorite dress, hoping to resurrect the warmth they once had. But he never showed, returning home in the early hours reeking of champagne and cologne, his mind clearly elsewhere. That fight had been the final, brutal unmasking of how distant they'd become. She left, tears streaming down her face, praying he would stop her, only to be met with stony silence. Sophia wondered if her departure had even fazed him, or if it just freed him to openly pursue the woman he had found so captivating in his office, his right-hand executive, who seemed to whisper everything he wanted to hear. Now, in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a catering hallway, the irony of her predicament stung like a fresh wound, cleaning tables and fetching plates at the wedding of her ex-husband to that very same woman. "Are you okay?" a fellow server asked, noticing her shaken expression. Sophia forced a tight smile, nodding. "Just need a minute," she lied. In truth, she needed a lifetime to unpack the chaos swirling through her mind. She glanced at the door, half expecting Marcus to burst in after her, but he didn't. If she was honest with herself, she wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Taking a steadying breath, she lifted the tray and walked back into the storm of polite laughter and clinking glassware. She kept her posture straight, determined to do her job despite the emotional tempest inside her. Tonight, she would endure. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to navigate the fact that Marcus now knew about the life growing inside her, and that there was no escaping the past they had both tried to bury. Across the room, Ivy Hahn had been watching. Though she chatted amiably with guests and offered gracious smiles whenever someone complimented her gown or her new status as Mrs. Bennet, her attention frequently darted toward Marcus. She noticed the stiff set of his shoulders, the tension in his jaw, and how his eyes kept drifting to the waitstaff area. Something was off, and Ivy's instincts were rarely wrong. Throughout their whirlwind romance and short engagement, she had prided herself on reading Marcus's moods, on stepping in to provide the encouragement or advice he needed for every business negotiation. He was a powerful man, yes, but Ivy liked to think it was her unwavering support and strategic mind that had helped him clinch those last few major deals. Still, there was one area she found herself less equipped to handle: his past with Sophia Morales. In the lead-up to the wedding, Ivy had sensed a restlessness in Marcus that no amount of professional success could quench. He occasionally mentioned the name Sophia late at night, once mumbling an apology in his sleep. Curiosity had led Ivy to do a bit of digging, discovering that Sophia was no mere college fling, but the woman who had stood beside Marcus through the formative years of MB Innovations. The abruptness of their divorce, finalized just 6 months before, remained a puzzle. Standing at the reception now, Ivy felt her stomach twist. She excused herself from a conversation with an influential investor, striding purposefully toward Marcus. He was staring off in the direction of the staff corridor, his expression distant. "Marcus," she said softly, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "Are you all right? You seem preoccupied." He managed a thin smile, shaking his head. "I'm fine," he said, but there was a tremor in his voice. "Just a lot on my mind." Ivy followed his gaze, catching a fleeting glimpse of Sophia slipping back into the ballroom, pregnant belly and all. She felt her pulse spike. Instantly, a suspicion flickered in her mind. Could this woman be the ex-wife? Ivy's heart pounded, recalling the few photos she'd found buried in old newspaper articles about Marcus's initial success. The woman in those images had a similar face, softer and smiling. The woman she saw now looked thinner, older, burdened. Yet the resemblance was there. And that bump, swallowing her unease, Ivy tried to regain her composure. "If you're overwhelmed by the crowd, we can step outside," she suggested, leaning closer so no one else would hear. Marcus nodded but didn't move. He seemed frozen in place, as if tethered by some invisible rope to the woman clearing tables a few yards away. Recognizing that she would get no further explanation from him at this moment, Ivy simply tightened her grip on his arm, her own thoughts spinning in wild speculation. Eventually, the evening's formalities demanded Marcus's presence on stage to give a speech. As he stood at the microphone, the ballroom erupted into applause. He cleared his throat, delivering the expected remarks about gratitude, partnership, and how MB Innovations would continue blazing new trails under his leadership. Yet even as he spoke, his mind remained split between the polished words leaving his mouth and the tumultuous thoughts raging inside about Sophia and the baby. Halfway through his address, his gaze involuntarily swept the crowd. He spotted Sophia standing along the far wall, her tray now resting on a side table as she watched him with an unreadable expression. For a split second, their eyes locked, and Marcus nearly lost his train of thought. He coughed to cover the awkward pause, then forced a bright smile to cap off the final lines of his speech. The applause resumed, but all he felt was a churning sense of disquiet. He made his exit as soon as protocol allowed, ignoring Ivy's inquisitive stare. Internally, he wrestled with the question of what to do next. Confronting Sophia in such a public setting was fraught with risk, not just for appearances, but for the fragile state of their relationship, whatever remained of it. Another part of him raged at the injustice of finding out about a child so unexpectedly. Yet he couldn't deny the guilt that told him he might be the reason she never said a word. Slinking away from the heart of the reception, Marcus circled the perimeter of the ballroom, finally locating Sophia near a curtained alcove. She was wiping down a stack of plates, and as he approached, she glanced up with evident resignation. "We need to talk," he said quietly, gesturing behind the curtain to a quieter corridor. She sighed, reluctant but seeming to agree that a private space was necessary. They slipped past the heavy velvet drape into a hallway lit by muted sconces. The muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glassware formed a strange contrast to the tension mounting between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, keeping his voice low but urgent. "You had to know. I should have." He stopped, words failing him. Sophia's expression was tight with anger and hurt. "Tell you?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "When exactly should I have told you, Marcus? Before or after you called me ungrateful for not supporting your career enough? Before or after you signed the divorce papers without so much as a second thought?" Her eyes shone with tears she refused to let fall. He swallowed, shoulders sagging. I never knew," he tried to say, but the words felt pitiful. She just looked at him, sorrow and frustration warring in her gaze. In that moment, he realized that no matter how shocked he was to discover she was pregnant, it was nothing compared to the months of isolation and heartbreak she must have endured on her own. The corridor felt stifling. Sophia crossed her arms over her chest protectively, as if shielding her heart from the turmoil that Marcus's questions unleashed. He took a step closer and she instinctively backed away, unwilling to let him close the distance so easily. Through the thick drapes, they could still hear the murmur of music and the chatter of guests in the ballroom, an unwelcome reminder that this was all happening in the midst of his wedding celebration to another woman. Marcus's voice cracked with genuine remorse. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I never meant—" She interrupted him, shaking her head. "You never meant what? To leave me behind while you chased your dream? To let Ivy slip into a role that used to be mine? Or maybe you never meant to find out about the baby at all, so you could live guilt-free." Her words were sharp, but her eyes brimmed with deep sadness. Outside, someone laughed boisterously, perhaps a guest enjoying the expensive wine. Inside the corridor, the tension was palpable. "Did you even care what happened to me?" Sophia continued, her tone quieter. "You were so busy with the next deal, the next investor, the next magazine feature. Where did I fit in?" He wanted to argue that she fit in everywhere, that she was the reason he'd had the courage to start MB Innovations in the first place. But the reality of the last couple of years weighed heavy on him. As his ambitions soared, he demanded more of her time, more of her emotional support, without giving the same in return. He had taken her presence for granted, assuming she'd always be there. Sophia pressed her lips together, struggling to contain her emotions. "I'm done explaining myself," she said finally, her hand drifting to her belly. You found your success, your new partner, and your new life. I'm just trying to survive now." Marcus felt a surge of protectiveness at the sight of her cradling her unborn child. "But it's mine, isn't it?" he asked, voice trembling. A tear slipped down Sophia's cheek, and she nodded once, unable to speak. Marcus drew in a shaky breath, the enormity of the situation crashing over him. He had a child on the way, a child he hadn't planned for, a child he wasn't even sure he deserved to know. Before he could say more, Sophia brushed past him. "I have work to do," she muttered, refusing to meet his gaze. He stood there, staring at the spot where she'd been, aware that their conversation was far from finished. But for now, she needed space, and he was left with the agonizing realization that the wedding reception he'd planned with Ivy felt hollow, overshadowed by the truth he could no longer ignore. When Marcus finally emerged from behind the curtain, Ivy was waiting. She noticed the drawn look on his face, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. "Marcus, what's going on?" she asked, her polished tone masking the anxiety roiling beneath the surface. He hesitated, searching for an explanation that could make sense of the emotional storm currently tearing through him. "Just someone from my past," he answered vaguely, hoping she wouldn't press further. But Ivy was neither naive nor blindly trusting. She arched a perfectly shaped brow. "Marcus, you look like you've seen a ghost. This isn't just someone from your past, is it?" Torn between the necessity of honesty and the fear of her reaction, Marcus exhaled. "It's Sophia," he admitted quietly, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. She's working here as part of the catering staff." For a moment, Ivy's eyes widened, then narrowed in suspicion. "Your ex-wife?" she demanded, her voice pitched low but laced with an undercurrent of alarm. When he nodded, a flicker of disbelief and jealousy rippled across her face. She glanced toward the corridor, her thoughts undoubtedly firing off in rapid sequence. Marcus swallowed, trying to maintain composure. The glimmer of tears in his eyes hadn't escaped Ivy's notice. She reached out to touch his shoulder. "Marcus, what exactly did she say to you?" Her voice was controlled, but her grip on his arm tightened. He hesitated, weighing whether to spill the entire truth, that Sophia was pregnant and that he might very well be the father. The intensity of the evening threatened to overwhelm him, but he knew it was too late for half measures. She's pregnant," he finally admitted. His voice caught on the last word, and he had to clear his throat. "And it's likely mine." For a fleeting second, Ivy simply stared at him, her expression oscillating between shock, betrayal, and something akin to panic. Her next words were carefully measured. "Are you certain?" Marcus found himself nodding, as though the nod itself might confirm paternity. "We," she admitted it, "and the timeline fits," he managed. The expression on Ivy's face hardened, her eyes sparkling with a mix of fear and anger. She glanced around again at the throng of guests, the lights, the cameras, the entire orchestrated spectacle. "This is our wedding vow," she hissed, voice trembling with controlled rage. "Why is she here? Why didn't you tell me your ex-wife could still be in the picture?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss. He hadn't exactly expected Sophia to show up, and he certainly hadn't expected to see her pregnant. As Ivy's grip on his arm grew more urgent, he realized that his entire carefully constructed facade was on the verge of collapse, and that he owed both Sophia and Ivy a reckoning he had never planned to face. The tension at the wedding reception, now laced with secrets and barely contained emotion, mounted with each passing minute. Marcus felt like an actor in a farcical drama, expected to keep smiling for photographs and making toasts, even as his life splintered beneath the surface. Ivy clung to him in public view, plastering on a socialite's perfect grin, while behind the scenes, she demanded explanations he couldn't fully provide. Sophia, meanwhile, soldiered on in her catering uniform. With every table she cleared, every glass she refilled, she felt eyes upon her, from curious guests, from Ivy, or from Marcus himself. A few times she overheard snippets of conversation about the scandalous appearance of an ex-wife. The pitying looks from some older patrons made her want to shrink into herself. Yet she refused to abandon her shift, determined to earn the paycheck she had come for. In the swirl of this chaos, An elderly woman who recognized Sophia from her past approached her quietly. "My dear, I'm sorry to see you like this," the woman murmured, concern evident in her eyes. Sophia offered a tight smile, wishing the ground would swallow her up. The last thing she needed was sympathy, especially from someone who had once congratulated her at her own wedding to Marcus, praising them as the perfect couple. She mumbled a polite response and hurried away, her cheeks burning. As the night wore on, some of the guests left, and the band transitioned to a more laid-back set. The mood in the ballroom grew subdued, though pockets of drunken laughter still echoed. Ivy remained the consummate hostess, thanking everyone for attending and graciously posing for last-minute photos. But her gaze drifted repeatedly to Marcus, who now lingered near the bar, sipping water instead of champagne. Observing from a distance, Sophia noticed the flicker of conflict in Marcus's posture. She recalled how he once thrived in crowds, charming potential investors with his wit and confidence. Tonight, however, that assuredness seemed to wane, replaced by a restless energy she could feel across the room. In a way, it mirrored her own inner turmoil, the sense that tonight had forced open a Pandora's box of unresolved issues. Eventually, she found herself stepping outside onto a small balcony for a breath of fresh air. The cool night wind brushed against her flushed cheeks. For a moment, she allowed herself to wonder what life might have been like if Marcus had never let ambition consume him, if she had been able to share the news of the pregnancy under kinder circumstances. But reality intruded swiftly, reminding her that the path they had taken left little room for nostalgic fantasies. Marcus saw Sophia slip out onto the balcony and hesitated only a second before following her. He needed answers, closure, something to make sense of the storm raging in his mind. Leaving Ivy behind in the ballroom was a risky move, but the alternative, letting Sophia walk away without talking, felt unacceptable. Outside, the city lights glittered against the dark sky, and the muted sounds of traffic provided a stark contrast to the opulent celebration indoors. Sophia leaned on the wrought iron railing, her hair lightly stirred by the breeze. She turned when she sensed Marcus's presence, her gaze weary but unflinching. "I told you, I have nothing else to say," she began, crossing her arms over her chest. The gown of the city's skyline behind her only highlighted how out of place she seemed. An ex-wife at her former husband's wedding reception, pregnant and working an event she should never have had to attend. Marcus edged closer, hands in his pockets as if unsure what to do with them. "I know you hate me," he said quietly, "and I can't blame you. But I can't just let this night end without trying to fix this, or at least understand." Sophia closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. "You can't fix it, Marcus," she replied, her voice cracking slightly. "The divorce is done, you've remarried, and I've spent months scraping by, preparing for a baby alone." He swallowed hard, picturing her navigating prenatal appointments without a partner. It made his stomach churn with guilt. "Let me help," he pleaded. "Financially, emotionally, whatever you need. I was blind before, but I'm here now." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Now? On your wedding night? How fitting." She glanced at the door, fully aware Ivy could step out at any moment. "What about Ivy? This is her big day, isn't it?" Marcus looked down, torn between responsibility and the complicated loyalty he felt toward the woman he had just married. "I owe Ivy an explanation," he admitted, "but that doesn't negate the responsibility I have to you and our child." Sophia turned away again, staring at the city below. For a few moments, neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with regret and possibility. Finally, she whispered, "I'm not sure I can trust you. You let me walk away once. Who's to say you won't do it again when things get difficult?" The question lingered, echoing in Marcus's ears. He wanted to promise that he wouldn't, that he'd stay for her and the baby, but words felt hollow without tangible proof. All he knew was that the trajectory of his life had changed irrevocably. Whether he could repair the damage he'd done to Sophia and navigate the fallout with Ivy remained an open-ended question with no easy answers. The remainder of the reception dragged on. Guests began to depart in small clusters, some politely waving goodbye to Marcus or Ivy, others discreetly gossiping about the tension they sensed in the air. The newlyweds were expected to see off their attendees with gracious smiles, but Ivy's expression had grown noticeably cold. She pasted on a mask of social pleasantry whenever someone approached. Yet the moment their backs were turned, her face hardened as she glanced in Marcus's direction. Sophia, meanwhile, took the last rounds of plates to the kitchen. Her manager, noticing her distress, offered to let her leave early, but Sophia declined. She didn't want special treatment. She just wanted to finish her shift and slip away into the night. The baby nudged her ribs, a gentle reminder that in a few short months, everything in her life would revolve around a newborn child. Her heart pounded every time she thought of Marcus, standing mere feet away, hosting the final portion of the wedding he had once dreamed of sharing with her. She recalled the promises they'd made years ago, how they would build a future so intertwined that not even life's biggest storms could break them apart. And yet, here she was, pregnant and alone, uninvited to the life he now led. Ivy cornered Marcus by the dessert table, her nails digging lightly into his forearm. "I want to know exactly what is going on," she whispered, voice taut. "People are starting to talk, and you've been acting distant all night." Marcus clenched his jaw. "This isn't the place," he muttered, keeping his gaze averted. "Let's wrap up here, and we can talk in private." She pressed him further, but eventually relented, offering a tight nod that signaled a temporary truce. The final speeches and toasts concluded with half-hearted applause, and Ivy took the microphone to thank everyone for attending. She performed the role of the gracious bride flawlessly, but her stiff posture and forced smile betrayed her inner turmoil. Once the last of the guests filed out, an awkward hush fell over the ballroom. The staff began dismantling floral arrangements and collecting stray champagne glasses. Marcus lingered by the grand piano, the weight of the night bearing down on him. He caught sight of Sophia across the room, depositing her tray on a cart. Their gazes met for a fleeting second. Part of him longed to rush over, to insist on driving her home, to beg her to grant him the chance to be in her life again. But the reality of Ivy, the rings on their fingers, and the public spectacle they had just orchestrated, held him back. So he remained where he was, heartsick and uncertain, watching as Sophia quietly slipped out of the ballroom with the other servers, leaving him with more questions than answers. Later that evening, the newlyweds found themselves alone in the bridal suite, a luxurious set of rooms filled with arrangements of white roses and complimentary champagne. Ivy wasted no time. She kicked off her high heels, turned to face Marcus, and demanded an explanation. "I didn't sign up for secrets," she said, voice trembling with an anger that threatened to spill over. "If you're going to bring an ex-wife, especially one who's pregnant, into our wedding day, I at least deserve to know the truth." Marcus felt a headache pounding behind his eyes. Removing his tuxedo jacket, he sank onto the velvet sofa, exhaling. "I didn't plan this," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She's working for the catering company. I had no idea she'd be here tonight." Ivy crossed her arms. "And you're saying the baby is yours?" The words hung in the air, loaded with tension. Struggling to hold her gaze, Marcus nodded. "That's what she told me, and the timing lines up with our separation." He paused, recalling the final days of his marriage to Sophia, how quickly everything had escalated. "I didn't know she was pregnant. She never told me." Ivy's face reflected a mixture of shock and something darker, perhaps fear that this unexpected child might derail her newly minted role in Marcus's life. "So what does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice cracking on the last word. In truth, Marcus had no easy answer. Every scenario he imagined seemed rife with pain. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only found out a few hours ago. But I'm not going to abandon my child, Ivy." She paced the suite, eventually stopping at the mirror, where she caught sight of her reflection, hair styled to perfection, makeup still flawless under the soft lights. It felt surreal to her that this day, which should have been the pinnacle of her personal happiness, was unraveling into a crisis of epic proportions. "I always knew there was history between you two," she said, voice subdued. "But I never thought it would show up like this, especially not tonight." Marcus rose, crossing the room to place a tentative hand on her shoulder. "I promise to handle this responsibly," he said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "I'm sorry," he added quietly, acknowledging the betrayal Ivy must feel. She turned to face him, searching his eyes for sincerity. After a tense pause, she nodded tersely. "We'll figure it out," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. Without another word, she retreated into the adjoining bedroom, leaving Marcus standing there, still in his rumpled formal wear, wondering if it was even possible to reconcile these two worlds he had created, and whether Ivy would stand by him once the repercussions of the night fully settled in. Sophia returned to her modest apartment well past midnight. Kicking off her worn flats, she rubbed her aching feet and allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. The baby shifted within her, a gentle reminder that life went on despite the emotional roller coaster she had just endured. Trying to steady her thoughts, she flicked on a lamp in the small living room, revealing the essentials of her current existence: secondhand furniture, a baby crib half-assembled near the wall, and piles of notes on prenatal care. Her phone buzzed with a text, an unknown number. With a weary sigh, she picked it up, only to see a short message from Marcus. "Please let me help. I'm sorry for everything. We need to talk again." She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Hours ago, she had been serving canapes at his wedding. Now he was asking for an opportunity to fix what had been shattered. Part of her wanted to throw the phone across the room. Another part, quieter but persistent, remembered the man who used to light up at her slightest triumph, who once gifted her a worn-out copy of her favorite book because he knew she couldn't afford the hardcover. She deleted the message without responding, at least for the moment. She needed time to think, to breathe, to feel the baby's rhythmic flutter, and decide how or if she wanted Marcus in their lives. In the weeks after they separated, Sophia had struggled with paying rent and managing her emotional health. News of her pregnancy had arrived like a double-edged sword: hope for a new life, but also a monumental challenge she would face alone. Night after night, she questioned whether to reach out to Marcus. Yet every time she recalled his indifference, she convinced herself he wouldn't care. Now, after the confrontation at the wedding, she realized her assumption might have been wrong, or at least incomplete. The conflict raging in her heart was whether he truly wanted to shoulder the responsibilities of fatherhood, or whether this was simply his guilt speaking. She also had to consider Ivy, the polished woman who had effectively stepped into Sophia's role the moment their marriage unraveled. Her gaze landed on the partially assembled crib, a product of several nights' worth of work. She rubbed her belly and whispered, "We'll be all right, baby. One way or another, we'll make it." Even if it meant shutting Marcus out for good, she would find a way. But as the night wore on, sleep eluded her. Lying awake in the darkness, she replayed the moment she'd seen him standing in the ballroom, recognition flashing in his eyes. There was no denying the powerful history they shared, and the even more powerful bond forming with each tiny kick beneath her ribcage. For the next few days, Marcus tried repeatedly to contact Sophia. He called, left voicemails, sent text messages, usually short, tentative pleas for a meeting. Sophia's initial response was silence. She needed space to navigate the emotional flood that came from seeing him again and from exposing the secret of her pregnancy. She had built a precarious semblance of independence, and letting Marcus crash back into her life threatened to knock down those fragile walls. Meanwhile, Ivy tried to maintain appearances in front of Marcus's business associates, but their newlywed glow had dimmed noticeably. Discreet questions and rumors floated around MB Innovations. Why did Mr. Bennett seem so out of sorts? Why did Mrs. Bennett, referring to Ivy, appear so tense? As much as Ivy attempted to present a united front, Marcus's distraction was too obvious. On more than one occasion, she found him locked in his office, staring vacantly at his phone. Finally, Sophia agreed to meet him for coffee one morning at a small cafe halfway between her apartment and MB Innovations headquarters. She picked a table in the corner, close to the window, where she could watch pedestrians bustling by. Marcus arrived early, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his tie slightly askew, the top button of his shirt undone. He spotted Sophia and approached with cautious steps. They exchanged greetings, awkward and formal, as if they were strangers. The coffee arrived, and for several minutes they sipped in silence, neither quite sure where to begin. Marcus broke the tension first, clearing his throat. "How far along are you?" he asked softly, eyes flicking to her belly. Sophia's hand rested protectively on her abdomen. "About 7 months," she answered, her voice steady. Marcus exhaled, the realization sinking in that he had missed nearly 2 trimesters of his child's development. I want to be involved, he said, leaning forward. Appointments, financial support, anything. I owe you more than just an apology. Her expression was guarded. It's not just about money, Marcus. It's about being present. You weren't there when it counted, and now everything's changed. He nodded, guilt evident in his eyes. I know, and I hate that I pushed you away. I can't change the past, but I can try to do better now. She studied him, remembering the fierce determination that once fueled his rise in business. I'm not sure I believe you, she admitted, swirling her coffee absently. You have Ivy, the company, your entire life is different. He paused, considering his response. That life isn't as perfect as it seems, he confessed, especially now. But let me prove to you I can be here, at least for the baby's sake, please. Sophia inhaled, absorbing his words. Their coffee date ended without a clear resolution, but it was a start, an acknowledgement that the path ahead would require more than just apologies, but also practical steps toward rebuilding trust, if that was even possible. In the weeks that followed, Marcus showed up with a kind of dogged persistence Sophia hadn't expected. He texted her politely before every prenatal appointment, asking if he could accompany her. Sometimes she said yes. Other times, she claimed she was fine on her own. When she allowed him to join, he would appear, often juggling a phone call or two, but placing the device on silent the moment she checked in at the clinic. They sat side by side in stiff chairs, flipping through outdated magazines. Occasionally, they exchanged a few polite words, but the tension hung between them like a weight neither could fully lift. Even so, when the doctor called Sophia's name, Marcus followed, listening intently to every piece of advice. The sound of the fetal heartbeat for the first time left him speechless, his eyes shining with emotion he did not bother to hide. Sophia was both moved and wary. She had grown accustomed to relying on no one but herself, especially since she'd been bracing for motherhood alone. Watching Marcus attempt to integrate it into her new reality was surreal, sometimes reassuring, sometimes threatening the independence she'd painstakingly cultivated. Still, she couldn't deny that he was trying. Word of Marcus's actions eventually reached Ivy. He hadn't hidden his visits, but he hadn't explicitly detailed them either, leaving her to piece together the information from half remarks and overheard phone calls. Her frustration simmered, escalating each time she realized Marcus was rushing off to another appointment with Sophia instead of spending time in the office or with her. At business dinners, she forced herself to laugh at jokes and engage in strategic conversations, all the while battling a gnawing jealousy. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting, Ivy confronted Marcus in the sleek conference room. So this is the new normal? She demanded, crossing her arms. You running off to coddle your ex-wife whenever she calls? Marcus sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. She's not just my ex-wife, Ivy. She's carrying my child. I can't ignore that. Her lips pursed as she scanned his face. And what about us, Marcus? How am I supposed to fit into this? I thought we were building a life together. He felt the weight of conflicting responsibilities bear down on him. I haven't forgotten about us, he insisted, but I need to do the right thing. Ivy shook her head, stepping back. I don't know if you're even sure what the right thing is anymore, she retorted, turning on her heel. Marcus watched her leave, realizing that no matter how genuine his intentions were towards Sophia and the baby, his marriage to Ivy was increasingly precarious. Through careful inquiries, Marcus started to uncover layers of deceit that complicated everything further. A longtime administrative assistant at MB Innovations quietly approached him one morning, hinting that Ivy might have intercepted emails and messages meant for him. Ones Sophia had sent months before their divorce became final. Intrigued and unsettled, Marcus probed deeper into the company's digital records. What he found shocked him. Several heartfelt emails from Sophia, dated around the time their marriage was crumbling, had been flagged and redirected to a spam folder that he never checked. Subject lines like, "We need to talk and please read this," lit up his screen. In them, Sophia poured out her concerns, her loneliness, and her futile attempts to repair the growing rift in their relationship. She even mentioned feeling off health-wise, though she hadn't been certain of her pregnancy yet. The timestamps revealed a heartbreaking timeline. Sophia had tried to reach him multiple times, but he never saw her please. As he read, fury coiled within him, not just at Ivy but at himself. He had allowed his career to blind him to the possibility that someone close to him might manipulate his personal life for their own gain. He recalled how fiercely Ivy had pushed him to focus on the bigger picture, often telling him to ignore distractions that could slow his meteoric rise. Looking back, it all felt so obvious. How she smoothly stepped into a supportive role, painting Sophia as the unhelpful spouse who didn't understand his ambitions. Confronting Ivy about it led to a volcanic argument in the penthouse they shared. She initially denied everything, but when Marcus presented the digital evidence, she broke down, defending herself with claims that she was only trying to protect his future. "Your marriage was already falling apart," she hissed through tears. "I gave you the push you needed. You can't blame me for you wanting a better life." Marcus stared at her, a stranger in the woman he had believed to be his partner. "A better life?" he echoed, voice thick with disgust. "You destroyed what little chance Sophia and I had at saving ours. And now there's a child involved." In the aftermath, the trust between Marcus and Ivy shattered. Lawyers were discreetly contacted. Marcus to safeguard his assets, Ivy to challenge any potential claim that she had acted unethically. Gossip leaked to the press, fueling rumors of an impending second divorce for the newly minted Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. The tension at MB Innovations also soared, as employees whispered about what Ivy might do next and whether Marcus's personal crisis would derail the company's success. All the while, Sophia remained on the periphery, unaware of the explosive confrontation. She continued her day-to-day routine, focusing on her pregnancy and staying out of the labyrinth of Marcus's corporate life. Little did she know that her heartfelt emails had ignited a chain reaction, one that could change everything for them all, depending on whether Marcus emerged from the wreckage strong enough to embrace his responsibilities. Ivy vacated the penthouse soon after the confrontation, her departure swift and dramatic. She left behind a cascade of bitter words in a trail of half-packed suitcases, threatening a high-stakes legal battle over the dissolution of their marriage. Publicly, she tried to maintain her polished image, but leaks to the media about her role in intercepting Sophia's messages painted her as a conniving figure. Marcus found himself in an odd state of relief and despair. On one hand, he felt liberated from a toxic arrangement that had eroded his ethics and alienated him from the person he used to be. On the other, the scandal rocked both his reputation and that of MB Innovations. Investors grew uneasy, journalists hounded him for statements, and the company's board pressured him to offer assurances that his personal life wouldn't jeopardize corporate interests. Throughout this upheaval, Marcus continued to show up for Sophia. He attended more of her doctor's appointments, even helped her pick out baby supplies. Their interactions were still tentative. Sophia had not forgotten how easily he had once cast her aside. Yet she couldn't dismiss the sincerity in his actions, nor the pain in his eyes whenever he realized how many milestones he had missed. One evening, he arrived at her apartment with a carefully prepared folder, detailing a trust fund for the child's future education, along with health insurance plans that would cover Sophia's remaining prenatal care. Uncomfortable with the idea of charity, she hesitated before accepting. Eventually, she consented, recognizing that while independence was crucial to her, this child deserved every advantage possible. They sat together on her worn-out couch, the hum of the city drifting through an open window. Marcus mentioned that Ivy was no longer living with him, and Sophia remained silent, not entirely sure what to feel. Vindication? Pity? Anger that it had taken him so long to see Ivy's true colors? She simply placed a hand on her belly, shifting her weight to relieve an ache in her lower back. Marcus reached out gently, a question in his eyes, and Sophia nodded, letting him rest his palm where the baby kicked. A flutter passed between them, both physical and emotional. She allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, leaning her head back and closing her eyes. For an instant, it felt like a fragment of the partnership they once had, re-emerging in the quiet of a humble apartment. Yet neither of them dared call it reconciliation. Too much damage had been done, and the future was riddled with uncertainty. Still, for the life that stirred within Sophia, they both agreed on one thing. They would do their best to provide a stable, loving environment, whatever that might look like, given the complicated history and the looming legal entanglements now hanging over them. As Sophia's due date crept closer, The media frenzy surrounding Marcus and Ivy's marital collapse intensified. Paparazzi occasionally staked out near Sophia's building, hoping to snap a photograph of the pregnant ex-wife who had become an unwitting key player in a scandalous narrative. Friends advised her to move, but she resisted. She had just begun to feel settled, and the last thing she wanted was another disruption. Marcus worked tirelessly to contain the fallout. Through press releases and carefully managed interviews, he explained the end of his relationship with Ivy in vague terms, emphasizing that they grew apart. Behind closed doors, however, he battled her legal team's demands for a portion of MB Innovation's assets. Ivy's approach was ruthless. She insisted that her strategic input had boosted the company's valuation. The board watched nervously, unsure whether to back Marcus fully or hold him at arm's length to protect the brand. All of this left Sophia feeling uneasy about letting Marcus grow too enmeshed in her life. Part of her wanted to shield herself and the baby from the drama. Another part felt guilty for even considering keeping him out. He was the baby's father, after all. During a particularly heated discussion in her living room, she told him plainly, "I can't be another business fiasco, Marcus. I'm not a PR problem you can solve with press statements. This is my life and our child's." He nodded, eyes filled with regret. "I know," he said softly, "and that's why I'm stepping back from some of the company's responsibilities. I need to focus on what really matters." True to his word, Marcus delegated more tasks to his executive team, refusing to let the scandal dictate his involvement with Sophia and the baby. He started arriving at her apartment on weekends to assemble furniture, a rocking chair, bookshelves, even a small dresser for baby clothes. They worked in near silence, interrupted only by the occasional question about a missing screw or a wrong-sized drill bit. Despite the unspoken tension, there was a quiet sense of teamwork reminiscent of their earlier days when they tackled challenges side by side. On a drizzly Saturday afternoon, Sophia felt a contraction that stole her breath. She gasped and Marcus rushed to her side, panic evident in his eyes. After a tense few minutes, the pain subsided, a false alarm, but it served as a reminder that the baby would arrive soon, whether they were ready or not. Marcus looked at her, an odd mixture of fear and elation on his face. "We're really doing this," he whispered, gently placing a hand on her belly. Sophia managed a small smile, her eyes glistening. "Yes," she said, "we are." The baby arrived on a clear, crisp morning that felt oddly serene despite the chaos that had led to this point. Sophia woke at dawn with steady contractions, prompting a hurried call to Marcus, who arrived at her apartment in record time. Together, they navigated the rush-hour traffic to the hospital, tension palpable but laced with a shared determination to see this through. In the labor and delivery ward, time seemed both infinite and fleeting. Sophia battled waves of pain with controlled breathing, occasionally crushing Marcus's hand in a desperate squeeze. He whispered words of encouragement, dabbing sweat from her forehead and marveling at her strength. Nurses and doctors flitted in and out, adjusting monitors and offering reassurances. Finally, after hours that felt like an eternity, a piercing cry signaled the arrival of new life. Tears slipped down Marcus's cheeks as he beheld his newborn child, a tiny, fragile person with the faintest swirls of dark hair. Sophia, exhausted and tearful, reached out to hold the baby first, her trembling arms cradling the future they had never properly planned. Then she glanced up, meeting Marcus's eyes. Without words, she nodded, allowing him to take the baby gently. In that moment, all the bitterness and betrayal they had endured receded, overshadowed by the awe of this miracle. The baby fussed quietly, then settled against Marcus's chest. Outside, the sun's rays filtered through the hospital blinds, illuminating a scene that felt both surreal and profoundly grounding. Later, while the nurses assisted Sophia with post-delivery care, Marcus sat in a corner of the room, still clutching his newborn. Ivy was gone from his life, his public image was in tatters, and the company he'd built was under scrutiny. Yet none of that seemed to matter compared to the small life he now held in his arms. He whispered a silent vow to be a better man, a better father, someone who wouldn't let ambition eclipse love again. Sophia watched him from the hospital bed, her expression a mixture of hope and lingering hurt. She knew the road ahead would be complicated. Forgiveness wouldn't come overnight, nor would the rebuilding of trust. But in the soft coos of their child, in the trembling gratitude in Marcus's eyes, she saw a glimmer of possibility. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine that they might carve out a new kind of family. Messy, unconventional, but built on the lessons of the past and the promise that neither of them would walk away again. As she drifted off to sleep, she clung to that fragile hope, the knowledge that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings grow out of life's most tumultuous storms. After all the hardships and tangled relationships, our story arrives at a hopeful conclusion. Marcus learns humility and responsibility. Sophia finds the inner strength to forgive and embrace new possibilities. And even the secondary characters have moments of self-reflection that lead them to better paths in life. From my perspective, these trials have a silver lining. They show us that, when given a chance, people can learn from their mistakes and become better versions of themselves. It's a powerful reminder that love, compassion, and courage can rebuild bridges that once seemed irreparably damaged. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe people can truly change? Would you have trusted Marcus again in Sophia's position? Let us know in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going.